As a kid, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was one of my favourite shows, right next to Pokemon and just ahead of the likes of Digimon, Beyblade, and Medabot. I remember my Saturday mornings for a decent portion of my childhood was that I would wake up at 7, play games until about 8, go downstairs, grab breakfast, and watch TV. Shows like Recess and Lloyd in Space were regular shows that I would enjoy, but the 1-2 of Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Before SmackDown came on at 10 were the cornerstones of my Saturday mornings. But I'm not here to talk about Pokemon or wrestling at the moment. So Yu-Gi-Oh! Was actually one of my favourite things just in general for a good few years. I watched the show, I had the first couple of volumes of the original manga that I got for Christmas one year, which really caught me off guard with how extremely and drastically different it was from the show, and of course, I had a whole bunch of the cards and the games, starting with the focus of today's video. Hello and welcome to the first episode of Does Anyone Remember? A series where I take a look at games from my childhood, games that I don't see people talk about very often, or games that are just generally kind of obscure. And I'm starting today with Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories, a game for the original PlayStation that came out in 1999 in Japan, but in North America and Europe we had to wait until 2002 to get it, by which time the game's sequel was already out in Japan and had been for about a year. And looking at the release dates, I assume I must have gotten this as a slightly late present for my 6th birthday. In Forbidden Memories, you play as the Prince of Egypt. His name hadn't been revealed to be Atem the anime yet, so in the 4Kids dub they were still just calling him Yami, and the story begins with a man searching for what he calls the forbidden treasure of the ancient sorcerers, and he begins to laugh like an absolute maniac upon actually finding it, which brings you to a title card. Beginning of the game, you, the player, are immediately being reprimanded by Simon Miran, an advisor to the king who isn't too pleased about you trying to sneak out of the palace to go and play card games with the locals, and tries to give you a very, very long-winded speech about how, as the prince, you probably shouldn't be going out and playing card games with the commoners, but you can just run off at any time during this speech. Although if you do choose to sit and listen to his entire long, rambling diatribe, you can just kind of stay in the palace for the night, and that will actually just skip pretty much the entire first act of the story. However, you can leave, you can just run away from Simon at any time, and if you choose to go back to the palace, you can duel him, who, realistically, he displays a lot of confidence being the guy who actually taught you the game, but he is an absolute pushover. Then you can go to the local duel ground, where you'll meet your friend Taina, who is just Teia from the anime only in ancient Egypt, and 3 villagers. Teia, I'll just call her Teia, and Villager 1 are complete pushovers, but Villagers 2 and 3, they can put up quite a fight. I have lost to them in the past. When you go to leave the duel field, Taina will ask you to go with her to check out the mage's procession that's going on in the town square. There you'll encounter Jono, your other friend, represented by Joey in this game, and you'll find him dueling someone, and in true Jono fashion, he was losing to the recurring antagonist of the game, Seto, who is obviously the ancient Egypt equivalent of Seto Kaiba. And then, a bit of trash talk later, the duel is set. You are going to duel Seto at the duel ground later that night. You can just head straight there, duel Jono and then duel Seto, but if you head to the shrine before returning to the duel field, you can eavesdrop on a meeting among 5 high mages who will become important later on in the game. So then, obviously, you go back to the duel ground, you can either duel or pass on dueling Jono, then you duel Seto, and of course, you have to win because if you lose once in this game, you game over. After you defeat Seto, he will leave, and then you can duel everyone there again before returning to the palace for the night. Upon your return to the palace, Simon Miran tells you that it is time for you to really just go to bed, so, well, you go to bed, basically. And then he's sat in his chambers thinking, when a guard runs in and tells him that the palace is under attack. Because the palace is being attacked by Haitian, another advisor of the king, and the guy who we saw earlier in the game in the opening, learning the forbidden power of the ancient sorcerers. The palace is crumbling, the king and queen are stated to be dead, and you have to make your escape, only to be blocked by and forced to duel Haitian. And honestly, you have to lose this duel. This is the one time in the game where you absolutely have to lose, because basically, you can win this duel, although winning it with your starter deck at that point, you would need either an incredible bit of luck or an absolute miracle to win. However, even if you do win, he's just like, okay, no, duel me again, and then you just have to duel him over and over again until you do lose. But then, upon your loss, Haitian is about to finish you off when Simon Moran appears, holding him back and begging you to shatter the Millennium Puzzle that he entrusted to you, just to prevent it from falling into his hands. You do so, and Act 1 is complete. Your spirit lives on in the Millennium Puzzle, where it will rest for the next 5,000 years. Act 2 starts in the modern day, with Joey waking Yugi up from a dream as the World Championship Tournament is about to start. You have the opening ceremony and the games begin. This is just a simple series of duels with you going back to the card shop after each one, although despite the fact that it's a card shop, you can't actually buy any cards from it. Taya is working there part-time during the tournament though, and you can save your game by talking to her. Your first 4 opponents in the tournament are Rex Raptor, followed by Weevil Underwood, My Valentine, and Bandit Keith, although none of them use a deck that has even a passing resemblance to what they had in the anime. I assume that this is for balance purposes, although the difficulty jump from Weevil to My and then to Keith can still be pretty noticeable. And I assume that other major duelists like Mako Tsunami, Bones, Panic, and Paradox Brothers either A, just weren't in the tournament, or B, much more likely, were on Joey's side of the bracket. And after you beat Bandit Keith, you get some story progression before your next duel, as is standard for Shadi making his entrance. Shadi tells Yugi about the spirit of the Millennium Puzzle, and uses his Millennium Key to let Yugi enter and talk to him. The spirit says nothing, but has 6 cards in his hand, which are revealed to be blank and somehow in Yugi's possession when he returns to the real world. But with no idea as to what the cards are to be used for, we continue with the tournament, and conveniently enough, Shadi is our next opponent. He's a complete pushover, and I choose to believe that this is because if you lost to him, you'd have quite a lot of text to go back through to get to where you needed to be. After Shadi is defeated, you learn the secret of the cards, as his Millennium Key and Millennium Scales are absorbed into 2 of them. This will happen for all of the remaining duels in the tournament. After that, you duel Bakura in top 16. He has a very defensive playstyle, but you win and you earn the Millennium Ring, followed by dueling Pegasus in the quarterfinals, who obviously has the Millennium Eye, and I distinctly remember just getting stuck there for weeks not being able to beat him, but hey, eventually I did manage to win and earn the Millennium Eye. Then you move on to the semi-finals, where you duel Isis, who is also a Shizu, because I don't think she turned up in the anime at that point, and she uses a primarily C-based deck, but you defeat her and win the Millennium Necklace. And then it's time for the finals, where you duel the man himself, Seto Kaiba, in one final duel for the Millennium Rod. And in this duel, he can summon the Blue Eyes White Dragon. But in the end, you do manage to win, and after Yugi has now gathered all of the items together by winning the tournament, you get brought back to Egypt to start Act 3. Act 3 starts with you awakening at the abandoned Shrine of Glory, and now you have a larger world to look at beyond the initial town. You head to the King's Valley to talk to Sidin, who, judging from his design, I assume he must be an ancestor of Shadi. There, you learn that the King and Queen's bodies weren't allowed to have a proper burial because Haitian would not allow it, and you can't access the Forbidden Ruins, quite simply because Sidin has no idea where they are, but he does mention that Simon Moran may have known their location, so you return to the town. Exploring the town, you can find the old duel ground and ruins, but see a familiar face in Jono, who takes you to the new hidden duel ground and the card shop where you can now save the game, and also duel tougher versions of Jono and Tena, who now have decks that are a bit more in line with their anime counterparts. Weird little side note, Tristan just doesn't exist in this game at all. He doesn't have an equivalent in ancient Egypt, he isn't seen or referenced in the modern day, so he's just not kind of there at all. But Jono and Tena are obviously glad to see you, and were also obviously very surprised to learn that you were a prince. They also explained that the mages burned down the old duel ground when they wouldn't tell them where you were. Leaving the hidden duel ground and card shop, you head to the ruins of the palace. There you find and duel a mage soldier, who I assume is posted there to keep people from, just having a look around the ruins of the palace. But you defeat him and search Simon's room. There you'll find an old parchment with a map to the Forbidden Ruins. You take it back to Sidin in the King's Valley, and he leads the way. Unknown to you both, Seto has followed you there, and seems to know a rather alarming amount about the Forbidden Ruins. It goes without saying that he's extremely suspicious, and knows more than he's letting on, with Sidin even noting that he smells a rat, but you do as Seto suggests, and goes to each of the 5 shrines to get back the Millennium items. You now have to challenge the 5 shrines: the forest, desert, sea, mountain, and meadow. Each is guarded by a low and a high mage, the high mages being the ones you overheard at the shrine earlier in the game, and you have to defeat each of them to earn back the Millennium items. Unubisius, Lord of the Forest, holds the Millennium Key. Martus, Lord of the Desert, holds the Millennium Scales. Sekhmeton, Lord of the Sea, holds the Millennium Necklace. Atenza, Lord of the Mountains, holds the Millennium Ring. And Kapura, Lord of the Plains, holds the Millennium Eye. You can beat them in any order, but from my personal experience, if I had to put them in difficulty order from weakest to strongest, I would probably say it's Martus, then Sekhmeton, then Anubisius, then Atenza, and finally Kapura. But obviously your deck composition and what they play in each duel will play a massive part in, how difficult each one will end up being for you. After clearing out 2 or 3 of the shrines and earning back the Millennium items, you can return to the duel field, where a worried Jono will tell you that some mages came in and kidnapped Tena, taking her to the vast shrine behind the town. To rescue her, you must enter the labyrinth and duel the mage guarding it, before having to navigate your way through the labyrinth. The solution is to go right, left, right. And then, if you make one mistake, you have to duel the mage again, and your progress resets. You make your way through the labyrinth, and you'll find Seto and Haitian at the end. They'll return Tena, but now you have to duel Seto for a second time. And this duel is completely missable. If you never go back to the duel field, you never have to do it, but at the same time you have to come through the labyrinth later on in the game anyway, so it's worth doing now, even just to avoid having to do the labyrinth later. But after you do that, and finish off the rest of the temples, it's on to the nightmare, known as the Final 6. These are obviously the final 6 duels in the game, and this is where it goes from being challenging to the game basically just cheating at any opportunity it gets. And if you haven't already, this is where you basically are forced to grind for cards to have even a remote chance of winning. But while I'm on about that, let's quickly just put a pin in the story and talk about the gameplay for a bit before I head on into the finale. The gameplay of Forbidden Memories is incredibly simple. You draw at the start of your turn and bring your hand back up to 5 cards, and you play 1 card on the field, be it a monster, a magic card, or a trap card. Also, just a little note, you can actually tell whether or not the AI has played a magic or a trap card, because it will check spell cards, but it won't check traps. Your starter deck will contain 40 cards. These are always 37 monsters, which pull from a few different pools based on their strength, an equip spell, a field spell, and either Raigeki or Darkhoul. Personally, I would advise just resetting until you get Raigeki, because it just destroys all of the monsters on your opponent's side of the field, as opposed to Darkhoul, which just destroys everything on the board, which isn't exactly ideal, especially late game, because then you're just leaving yourself open to your opponent's attack. Monsters can be placed into either attack or defense mode. Attack mode is vertical, defense mode is horizontal, and the outcome of their clashes is determined by which number is bigger. In a clash between 2 attack mode monsters, the monster that has the higher attack power will destroy the weaker monster, with the difference in their attack points coming out of the owner's life points. If an attack mode monster attacks something in defense mode and overpowers it, the defending monster will be destroyed, but the owner won't take any damage. In the TCG, piercing damage is a thing on certain cards, but that isn't something you need to worry about here. However, if the defending monster has higher defense than the attacker's attack, the monster attacking won't be destroyed, but the difference will be taken out of the attacker's life points. If two attack mode monsters tie in attack points, they will both be destroyed, and if an attack mode monster attacks a defense mode monster and they tie, it'll just kinda do nothing. And my main takeaway from this paragraph is that explaining the combat of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a lot harder than I thought it would be. When you go into battle in Forbidden Memories, you can just press X and do the battle normally, or you can press square and then you'll get to see the monsters battle in 3D. It's pretty basic, but with how many monsters there are in the game, it's quite impressive to see them all modelled and animated with their own animations. The arena even changes depending on the type of field that you're on. It's really pretty cool to see, especially in a PS1 game from 1999. Fusion is an extremely important part of Forbidden Memories gameplay for a vast majority of the game, so you can fuse your monsters with no polymerization card required. As long as you know the combo, you're good to go. A few of the notable ones are Pyro plus Beast makes Flame Cerebrus, Pyro plus a Winged Beast, with one of them being over 1300 attack points, creates the Crimson Sunbird, Pyro plus Warrior, between 11 and 1800 attack points, creates Flame Swordsman. Note, I say Pyro monsters, but some fire ones just in general kind of work. So if you fused a Flame Swordsman then added a beast to it, you would still get Flame Cerebrus. Then you have Rock plus Dragon makes Stone Dragon. A rock plus a woman monster creates a Mystical Sand. A woman monster and a beast creates Nekogal 2. A plant and a dragon will create the Black Dragon Jungle King, and a zombie with a plant, as long as one of them is more than 1000 points but lower than 1800, will create the Pump King, King of Ghosts. Honestly, there's a ton of fusions in the game, and weirdly enough, some of the actual ones from the TCG don't work. For example, in the actual trading card game, to fuse Skull Knight, you need Ancient Brain and Tainted Wisdom. They do not fuse together to create it in this game. However, the single most important fusion in the entire game is the twin-headed Thunder Dragon, which is a Thunder monster and a dragon, with either of them having more than 1600 attack points. This creates the twin-headed Thunder Dragon, which has 2800 attack points, and it can solo a majority of the game. It also pretty much just destroys the sea and mountain temples, because, well, it's a Thunder monster, so it gets a field power bonus on both fields, which brings me very neatly onto the next thing I want to explain, that being field power bonuses. Field power bonuses are something to take into consideration, especially when you're up against the mages, but they largely make sense and will give a 500 point bonus to both attack and defense points, or in some cases, can take away 500 attack and defense points. The meadow is good for warriors and beast warrior monsters, the forest is good for beasts, plants, beast warriors and insect monsters, Wasteland is good for rocks, zombies and dinosaurs, the sea is good for fish, aqua monsters, sea serpents and thunder monsters, but will weaken fire monsters, well, specifically pyro monsters, and machines. Mountains are good for winged beasts, dragons and thunder monsters, and darkness will weaken fairies, but will increase the power of spellcasters and fiends. Forbidden Memories has a unique mechanic in the form of the Guardian Star system, where every monster has 2 Guardian Stars that you can pick from when you play the card. It's important to note that the AI opponents will always pick the top Guardian Star, which can make it a bit easier to read them and determine what they may have summoned in the late game, because a lot of the late game opponents use a lot of the same monsters. The stars themselves, though, are split into 2 groups. So there is the Sun, which is good against the Moon, which is good against Venus, which is good against Mercury, which is good against the Sun. And then there is Mars, which is good against Jupiter, which is good against Saturn, which is good against Uranus, which is good against Pluto, which is good against Neptune, which is good against Mars. So basically, it works in almost solar system order. If you think of the moon and go left, after going to Venus, then Mercury, then the sun, and then looping back to the moon, that's that set. And it's almost the same, only going to the right for Mars onwards. It does leave one strange anomaly, because in actual planet order, you would have Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, but basically Neptune and Pluto's places for this have been flipped. Yep. But I will leave astronomy to the experts. I just wanted to point that out because it's something I've noticed. Admittedly, the Guardian Star system can be a little bit daunting at first, but a lot of the monster types often have similar ones that you'll see a lot. So fish and aqua monsters almost always have Neptune, thunder monsters almost always have Pluto, rocks almost always have Uranus, winged beasts almost always have Saturn, pyro monsters almost always have Mars, insects almost always have Jupiter, fiends almost always have the moon, fairies almost always have the sun, and some monster types like dragons, warriors, and spellcasters just get a bit of a good mix of all of them. And having an advantageous Guardian Star will give your monster 500 attack and defense points for that battle. Keeping track of all the Guardian Stars and everything can be a little bit overwhelming at first, but it does quickly become second nature and manageable to work to your advantage. There will be times playing Forbidden Memories where you'll basically just brick your hand and have nothing that's particularly usable, and honestly, duels in this game can end very quickly, so don't be afraid to just throw away an entire hand if you feel like you need to. By the time you reach the endgame, it's not uncommon for duels to end one way or the other in honestly as few as 2 or 3 turns, so sometimes just throwing away an entire hand to hopefully pull something good next turn is a genuinely viable strategy. When you win a duel in Forbidden Memories, you'll be given a grade from S all the way down to D, and a POW or attack win type. These come down to how you played and the manner in which you won the duel. These different win types have different card drop pools for A and S POW, A and S TAC, and then a shared one for a B, C, or D grade in either pool. Then you'll win one card at random from the pool that you fall into with each win, and every duelist in the game has different pools of cards that they'll drop. You'll also get between 1 and 5 star chips depending on your grade, so you'll get 5 for an S, 4 for an A, 3 for a B, 2 for a C, 1 for a D, and you can use these star chips to trade in for cards using the codes on the actual TCG cards. But honestly, most of the good cards in the game cost so much that you'll probably never get a whole lot of use out of this mechanic without doing an insane amount of grinding. A good few of the cards do cost 999,999 star chips, and while some of those cards are winnable in-game from various opponents, realistically, you'll never legitimately win that many star chips without a dangerous level of dedication or addiction to the game. Although I do believe a lot of those other cards are locked behind the Japan-exclusive Pocket Station. So basically, you're going to end up grinding for cards in Free Duel, because, well, in Free Duel you could freely duel anyone you've already beaten in the story without having to worry about getting a game over if you lose just once. Free Duel mode also features one special opponent, known only as Duel Master K. I don't know if the K is meant to be Konami, or if it's meant to be the series creator, Kazuki Takahashi, may you rest in peace, but he's an opponent who will duel you with your deck. He's a pretty valuable opponent, especially if you're just picking up the game for the first time, because he can teach you about a lot of potential fusions and combos for your deck that you might not have known about. Once you get access to him, the Low Meadow Mage is probably everyone who ever played this game's best friend and worst enemy, because he can drop some really good cards for you, such as the Dark Magician, Gaia the Fierce Knight, and the Skull Knight. But the most important card he can possibly drop is the Meteor Black Dragon. It has 3,500 attack points, and can crush near enough any monster in the game without the need for a power-up or a field spell to boost it up. So you'll probably want to win 2 or 3 of these, but at the same time, it is very low chance that you'll win it, so you need to be prepared to grind and grind and grind and grind. You may get super lucky and get them very quickly, or you might end up having to duel this guy hundreds of times before you get 2 or 3 copies. It's also extremely advisable to try to get some S-Tech wins against some opponents like Pegasus to try to get cards like Bright Castle and Megamorph, which work on every monster in the game, and in the case of Megamorph, gives 1,000 points to both stats, as opposed to the normal 500. Unfortunately, winning with an S-Tech can take a little while, and you aren't always guaranteed to get something great every time, but honestly it's still worth doing just to have these cards, because the end of this game is just straight up not fair. But now that I've explained some of the gameplay, the Guardian Stars, and a little bit of deck building, let's get back to the end of the story. So you've cleared all of the shrines, have 6 of the 7 Millennium items, and built a deck that you feel confident about. It's time to head to the end game. You return to the vast shrine, skipping the labyrinth if you came through earlier to rescue Tena, and enter through some doors at the end. There you're stopped by Sebek and Neku, Haitian's 2 highest ranking guards, one in crocodile armor, the other in bird armor, which I assume are supposed to be evocative of the gods Sobek and Horus, respectively. These 2 are pretty manageable as long as you can summon something past 3,000 attack points to deal with Sebek's Metal Zoa, and 3150 to deal with Neku's Skull Knight, you're in the clear. If you have Meteor Black Dragon, it's basically a free win. Just put it on the Sun against Sebek, because Metal Zoa has the Moon as its primary Guardian Star. You hit over it anyway, but you know, just having the additional bonus points is kind of nice. And put it on Mars against Neku, because Skull Knight has Mercury as its primary Guardian Star, and because you duel them both on a Dark Field, the Mercury boost against the Sun, paired with the Dark boost from the field, would actually allow it to reach 3650, enough to destroy the Meteor Black Dragon. Other than that though, they can play some pretty nasty spells and traps, but they're fairly manageable. The worst is yet to come. After Sebek and Neku are defeated, you enter the Dark Shrine and find Haitian himself. It's time to put an end to his plan, avenge your family, and depose this despot masquerading as a king. And as far as I can tell, this rematch with Haitian is pretty much the exact same as when you dueled him earlier in the game in terms of his deck. But since you've now gone through the entire game, you should now be able to stand up to him much better. Defeat him and claim the Millennium Rod. All of the items are now in your possession. It was actually only while I was looking into a couple of things before I made this video that I learned that it turns out the opponents don't actually have a set deck that they use, and instead kind of have their own deck build phase, where the game will pull 40 cards out of a pool that varies per duelist, but some cards with each duelist will have a higher odd of being, pulled than others. So basically, you could end up with a very, very lucky run, where you get a very smooth run through the final 6, or they could prove to be an absolute nightmare. These final opponents basically just pull out all of the heavy hitters: Gate Guardian pieces, Black Skull Dragons, Black Luster Soldiers, Cosmo Queens, and the completed Gate Guardian itself as a basic card, on top of a couple of other nasty surprises. But the Meteor Black Dragon, specifically if you put it on the Sun Guardian Star, can take out most of them without even needing a power boost, which is very helpful. And it may also be beneficial to note that the AI will never put Metal Zoa, Black Skull Dragon, Meteor Black Dragon, Perfectly Ultimate Great Morph, Gate Guardian, or a couple of other monsters into defense mode. They'll just check them into attack mode and not attack that turn. To be more specific, I think it's if the monster has more than 3,000 base attack points, they won't put it into defense mode, but I don't know for certain. After Haitian falls, Seto takes you to the Forbidden Ruins and makes his extremely obvious betrayal known. Wielding the Millennium Rod and demanding that you turn over the rest of the items, he reveals his family's history with dark magic, and why the Forbidden Ruins are forbidden in the first place, showing you a sarcophagus with a place for each of the Millennium items. Obviously, this means it's time to duel, and honestly, I'd probably say that this next duel is the real final boss of the game. Seto 3 is ridiculous. He can have the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, a monster with 4,500 attack points, as a basic card that he can just play whenever. That is a very scary prospect, especially if you don't have a ton of equip spells available. Other than that though, he's pretty okay, although cards like Raigeki or Widespread Ruin can really do some damage, wiping out your entire front line, or just deleting any monster that you have the sheer audacity to attack with. And when you can only play one card per turn, that can cause a lot of problems, although realistically that statement could be made towards any of these final duels. After defeating Seto for the third and final time, you're given the chance to destroy the Millennium items, but before you can do so, Haitian re-emerges, holding his former right hand hostage at knife point, threatening to kill him if you don't do as he says. You comply and put all of the items into the sarcophagus. This awakens the Dark Knight, a malevolent entity and supposedly the creator of the Shadow Games. Haitian attempts to order the creature, believing it to be part of a pact. However, the Dark Knight has made no such pact with Haitian, transforming him into a card before burning it in his hand, eradicating the sorcerer completely, and Dark Knight proclaims it to be the loudest and ugliest card he's ever seen, one truly unworthy of a place in his deck, before he turns his attention to Seto and the Prince, claiming that they would make worthy additions. For plot purposes, you still have the special cards that Yugi won in the modern day, and those allow you to push him back, and then you duel the monster. Upon his defeat, he transforms into his true form, the Nightmare, and insists on one final game. In this last duel, he has no spells, no traps, and just monsters. It's basically just a matter as to whether or not you can beat him down before he does that to you. Defeating the Dark Knight will seal him away again. Seto will leave the ruins, never to be heard from again, and Atem will take his rightful place on the throne, ordering the Forbidden Ruins to be buried so none could or would awaken the Dark Knight ever again. And with that, the credits roll, and if you so choose, you can now just go right back in for New Game Plus and steamroll through most of the game with your now endgame deck. So that's Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories. It's a game from my childhood that I do look back on rather fondly, and I do come back and I can play it every year or two, but the absurd difficulty spikes to the point at which the game is basically just cheating by the end, and the insane grind to get useful cards just does not make it a very easy game to recommend to people. There's a reason as to why when people speedrun this game, they often use a mod that will give you 15 cards per win as opposed to just one. But the art is nice, the 3D models and animations are kind of impressive with how many there are for the time, and the soundtrack is really good. My personal favourite ones on the being the tournament preliminary theme, Priest Seto's duel theme, and the theme that plays when you duel Kaiba at the end of the tournament. That, and in general, there's like 722 cards in the game. I don't think all of them are obtainable, and I know that some are locked behind the Japan exclusive Pocket Station, but still, for how young of a card game itself was at that time, that is quite a lot. So would I say that Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories is a memorable game? Honestly, yeah, I think myself and basically everyone else that played it can attest to that, and a lot of people will definitely remember the game. Whether they remember it positively, or remember it for the frustration that it caused with the difficulty spikes and necessity of grinding for cards, that may be up for debate. But at the same time, I think a lot of people, myself included, do remember it very fondly, but is it a game that I would recommend for someone to try now in 2024, or whenever you're watching this video? And my answer to that is maybe. Although if you do want to play it, I would definitely advise using the mod that gives you 15 cards per win, as opposed to just one, because grinding can take what feels like an eternity otherwise. I played the game again a couple of years ago, and in order to get 2 Meteor Black Dragons, I ended up dueling the low Meadow Mage over 700 times, and even with speeding it up on an emulator, it still took hours. Thanks for watching this first episode of Does Anyone Remember? It's a series I've wanted to start for a very long time. I even made an entire episode on Jade Cocoon 2 but never released it, which has since unfortunately been lost to time and a dead PC. And I do know that Forbidden Memories is a fairly well-known game, which might make it a little bit of a strange choice for a first episode, but it's a game that I really want to talk about, and if you would like to see the game, without the frustration of the grinding, there will be a link to my main channel in both the description and in the end cards, where I actually play games rather than just talking about them, where I also just wrapped up a playthrough of Forbidden Memories. Feel free to check that out if you're interested. Uploads on this second channel will probably be a bit less frequent and more of a kind of as and when basis, but the plan for this second channel is for things like challenge runs and episodes of Does Anyone Remember, on top of maybe just talking about other things I'm into beyond games, such as like anime or movies, and if I ever decide to do like top 10s or tier lists or anything, they will also likely end up on here. Hopefully you'll consider subbing over here or on the main channel, no pressure though, if you don't want to, you don't have to. Oh, and I should note that don't expect LPs on every game I cover on Does Anyone Remember, or episodes of Does Anyone Remember on every game I LP. Some definitely will, but others more than likely won't. But anyway, that's all from me for this first episode. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you all for another video soon, whatever and whenever that may be. Okay, thanks for watching. Later.